Okay, let me do it. I don't know. It's hard to see. Sorry. I am getting out of a meeting. Wait a little while.
I guess can't feel as muted. Weird.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so I take it you can hear me. Wait a little while if somebody else comes on.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to set this up before I start driving back to my hotel. Okay.
Bennett.
Okay, trying to stay in touch with everybody in the strangest of ways. But thanks. As some of you know, I kind of like specialize in taxes. So every so often, I got to go and review stuff, especially since they made some major changes to the tax code this year. And I still teach volunteers how to do taxes. So every so often, I get to come down and meet people with the IRS. So I'm going to try to post a link to this short session on my YouTube channel so that people who kind of forgot about me doing this or were for whatever reason just not able to be here at this time, that they can take a look at it. Not much we're going to talk about today, but my objective is just to talk a little bit about the third chapter we have in the book, and it's about property. And as I mentioned before, the idea of property becomes one of the ways that we regulate the use of the environment. We're going to see more examples of this later, but property, to start out with, is basically ownership of something, and it can be both either real property like land that I'm looking at all around me now. Should figure out how to put this thing up so you can see where I'm driving, but this way it looks like the teacher's actually trying to conduct class. But land, it can be land, it can be buildings, but it also can be what we call personal property. It can be things that are like the car I'm driving in, or a plant that is sold at the flower store, or your personal device, your smart device, or your computer that you're using for getting into this session right now. So those are examples of physical, tangible property. We have personal property and we have real estate or real property. Then, as you also know from going to school for many years now, there's also something called intellectual property. Intellectual property is intangible. You can't really see it, feel it, or touch it, but you know it's there. It's like a patent. It could be like a copyright. It could be a trademark or something like that. So those are the types of property, and there are different levels of ownership as far as the property is concerned. If you own the entire property, that concept is called ownership in fee simple absolute. Particularly important with land because whoever owns the property, fee simple absolute, can do whatever they want with the property so long as it conforms with the legal use of the property. So legal use of the property, you're doing things on it that the law will allow. So if you had a situation where, let's say, you wanted to start a zoo, wildlife park, or whatever, but you were in the middle of the city. So the government authorities would not allow you to have that zoo in that area because it's not legal to use land in that fashion in that area. So that's one of the ways that we start to regulate the use of the land. And we see this a lot more. It's called zoning. Land is zoned for a certain type of use and a certain purpose. And beyond that, the owner cannot use that land because it becomes like what we would call a nuisance, and we'll talk about that in courts, but it'll be a nuisance to the community. So that's one way that a while ago we were able to restrict the use of land because it made other people in neighboring properties uncomfortable or maybe even sick because of the kind of activities that were going on the land. So the ownership of land generally resides in either a private person or the state, right? And for this purpose, a private person can be a corporation. These corporations are treated as people under the law of the United States. A lot of the land ownership obviously is with the government, but so too a lot of the land ownership is with individuals. Now, of course, the government is charged naturally to do those things that are in the best interest of the people. So this is one of the things that always comes up. So the government has a much easier time of regulating the use of land than anyone else. Now, private individuals, as you can imagine, grew up with this idea in the law that when you had property, one of your rights was to get the best and most value for it that you possibly could. Now, of course, we know that this puts things at odds because some people are not going to want to do things other than make a profit, or in other words, they only want to do things that make a profit. And corruption is generally not one of those things. We look at a lot of times, unfortunately, many individuals in society look for short-run gains and don't look at the long-term effect of the action on whatever they're doing. So, this has always been a problem for us ever since the idea of capitalism has come in, because nobody wants to do things in the public interest. Everybody's just motivated by as much gain as they possibly can get. So, and that's always been one of the reasons that we have these issues in environmental law and policy. So, um, that's one thing that I wanted you to understand, the rights of property owners and what property actually comes down to, and the various uses that the law, environmental or otherwise, allows for property usage. Now, I'm pretty sure some of you are aware of um, the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a NGO. It's a non-governmental organization. It's a not-for-profit 501c3 charity in the United States. The Nature Conservancy's mode of operandi, or method of doing things, is when they see properties which are rare and have house many species that people should not try to disrupt or dislodge or kill off, what the Nature Conservancy will actually do is significant fundraising, and they will buy land in order to save it. Because once you're the owner, you can do pretty much whatever you want with it, including just leaving it alone. Now, again, remember, in the for-profit world, because the Nature Conservancy is a non-profit, and that's a totally different uh, entity as far as the law is concerned. In the real world outside, it's mostly people doing things for profit. So you can see where the person that's self-interested in doing everything in their best interest, like capitalism brings out, is not going to be really liking the idea of leaving the land for future generations in its current state, or maintaining it to be able to safeguard certain animals or plants because they may be endangered. So, we're going to see those kinds of conflicts. And when you take the economics class, you'll see why you got so many people that are into it for profit, and you have so few people who are into it for altruistic purposes or environmental purposes. So this is something that we will be looking at, so that uh, one of the other things that comes up in property, and I think that might, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about that comes up in property is that the government cannot take away land from a private owner. There's something in the Fifth Amendment, which most of us know is the amendment that gives us the right against self-incrimination. We can take the Fifth and not give an answer. And it also prevents double jeopardy. We cannot be charged for the same criminal action twice. But the Fifth Amendment also provides for what's called takings. Takings are when the government decides that private property should be put to public use. But the system of economy that we live in says that even though private property should be used for the public and it would be in the public's best interest, the government still has to pay just compensation. So the rule is private property cannot be taken for public purposes without the payment of just compensation. Now, that seems clear cut for a while, because the only way that we saw property being taken is if you've ever, let's say in Honolulu, if you now know on the leeward side, there is a rail transit system being built. Those trestles reside on government property, but they also extend over public or sometimes private property. And some of those trestles, in order to make the route more direct, have to actually go on top of people's property. And what happened there is that the city had to do something called eminent domain. And eminent domain is the power that the government has to take private property for personal purposes so that they have a designated ability to be to take property away from a private individual and put it to public use. So you see that clearly when the uh, rail transit fixtures are put on people's land. Also, you'll see it like if you go down to Haunama Bay and you leave from Chaminade and you're going down Kalanaanole Highway. What had happened there in the past was Kalanaanole Highway was originally just a two-lane dirt horse-drawn carriage trail. Then it became, a two-lane road, and then ultimately it became a two-lane sort of highway, two lanes going in each direction. Then there was a huge development of houses and other things going on that side, greatly increasing the traffic because of the great increase in population there. So what became clear was there was another lane needed for the freeway. So what happened was the state and the city had to combine and condemn people's land. Now, not all of their land was condemned because as you go out there, you might have noticed that there's some driveways really close to the road. And you would go like, who would make a driveway that's like 10 feet from a road that you have to merge onto at least 35 miles an hour? And then if you look on the Malka side, you'll see some houses that look like they're literally carved into the side of the hill, and then also have a driveway that you look at it like, wow, this looks like a sliding board that just goes down, and then it turns really steeply and abruptly towards the road. Well, the reason for that was the driveway used to be much more normal, and the road used to be much further away from where the driveway is now. What happened? The government basically took control over the property and said, look, for the good of the public living on this island, we have to put another lane on each side of the freeway. And at that point, what happened was there was a condemnation proceeding, and people got paid for their land. But of course, only a portion of their land was taken from them for the extra lane on the freeway, and not their entire land. So they still got the benefit of living in their home, but they did not have the benefit of a larger yard or a larger driveway or even a safer entry onto the freeway. So what happened in this instance was people were compensated not only for the loss of that physical strip of land, but for the use and enjoyment of their own property, because now the freeway's right there where it wasn't before, and it may not have been something that they ever contemplated would happen when they originally bought that house. So that's a taking. Now, we see takings in other ways. Again, I pointed out that that strip of land going to Queens Beach on by Makapu. So as you're driving out to Haunama Bay, you see a large parcel of land off to the ocean side. There's a shooting range out there, a gun range, and nothing else. There might be some trail rides, but other than that, there's no use. And it's a beautiful piece of property. It's very flat, really wide, and it goes all the way out to the ocean. Well, as I said before, that was the planned site of another golf course like the one across the street, and a luxury homes as well as a luxury hotel development. That land was found to be special, and as a result, eminent domain was thought about, but the land was so expensive that the government really couldn't afford to buy it all from the private owner who had intended to develop it into a resort and luxury home development with a golf course. Of course, the reason that the development was stalled for so long was that the developer kind of ran out of money after they built the first development on the other side of Hawaii, on the other side of Kalanaanoli, where they had the golf course there and some homes already. Now, the problem is that that entire area that is now just not being developed was under the ocean at one time. So there's so much salt in the ground that they would have rehabilitated the ground, brought in new topsoil. It would have been a really tremendous maintenance endeavor, especially in light of the idea that they wanted to build a golf course through there as well, that they just couldn't finance it. So sitting there waiting for financing, and then in the meantime, the government decided that this land should be put to conservation purposes. So what the government did, instead of using eminent domain, condemning the land and buying it from the owner, what they did was they changed the zoning, and they changed it from luxury development, residential, to conservation. They did not take the land away from the owner, nor did they require the owner to sign over the deed for the land to the government. Now, of course, what happened was the owner made a claim that you have essentially taken away all the intended value that I have had in this property, because now all I can do is continue to pay for the land and let it sit, while I had originally intended to develop this land and make hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, as you know, in the world, so often, sad but true, money talks, everything else walks. And if you have a good argument and a good attorney, then you can pretty much convince a court that your way is the legal way and the government's way is an inappropriate way, because they were taking away your land without paying you anything for it. Right? Of course, the government argues that, no, we didn't take it away. You still have the deed to the property. It's still yours. You can still walk on it. It won't be trespassing, but you just can't build anything on it. To which the owner of the property replied that, well, that's all I wanted to do, because I was going to sell it to the people who I developed it for, and now I can't do that. So there's no use in having this land. And now, if it's conservation land, nobody's going to want to buy it, or they're going to buy it for such a low price that I will lose a lot of money if I have to sell it. So what happened was, there is what's called a constructive taking, and that's a theory that developed under cases like that, that said that the landowner was so deprived of the functional use of the property, it was as if, again, that's the key thing, as if the property were being taken away, even though the landowner still retains the deed to the property. Okay, so, that's one of those Fifth Amendment things, and it's been developing, because one of the other things that we see lately is that the government is only supposed to be able to take private property for public purposes. Now, there have been instances, and there is a case that we'll look at later, where private owners condemn private property for their own purposes, or seemingly their own purposes. So, what happens is that there are a lot of public landowners, and let's say there's a redevelopment project going on to revitalize the economy of a city or an area. Think about downtown. Think about downtown anywhere, and think about Chinatown in downtown. A lot of the properties have been there since the late 1900s or mid 1900s or earlier, when Chinese immigrants first came to the United States and established residences in areas that have become colloquially known as Chinatowns. Now, over the years, the property has passed down from one generation to the next, but with each generation having more and more people in it, more and more kids. So what happens is the property gets split up among the kids. So one person owns the building first and has 5 kids, and then when they die, they have now 5 owners that own the building. And then, of course, some of them move away, some of them stay there, but they get kids of their own. So now the 5 kids, let's say they have 4 kids each. So now we got 20 more kids. We got 20 more. Now we got 20 way split on the building. Well, you can see that after a few generations of this, it would be so hard to track down all the owners to be able to buy the land so that the builder can get it all and build something, you know, like a stadium project or public housing project or a waterworks or waterfront project, that it becomes virtually impossible to do things by investigation and buying out all of the owners that have a partial interest in the land. So recently, the courts have said that a private party wanting to do this for the betterment of the community, even if it is only commercial, has the ability to condemn the property and build on it, even if they don't have the release of ownership or the sale of ownership from the individual property owners. You know, because by this time there might be like 100 of them or 200 of them over many generations that they've owned the property since they originally acquired it, and it's too hard to find all the owners. So the courts have recently let developers condemn that property for the public good, but they're the ones that are going to directly benefit from it. And then what's going to happen as a result of that is that the developer gets all the money, gets all the property, and has to put aside a trust fund, but that trust fund may never, ever get to the actual owners. And of course, if it had to wait until it got to the actual owners, then the construction would never have been able to be completed because you can't build on somebody else's land. Some of you remember the situation with Mark Zuckerberg and his desire to buy a large parcel of property on Kauai. But there were many of these kuleanas, these land ownerships that had been passed down from generation to generation. And what had happened was that they can't find them, so he couldn't buy them. And he wanted to use this kind of private eminent domain power as well. But I haven't heard much lately, and I think lately he might have just given up on the idea because legally he didn't want to be divesting people of their cultural and historical ancestral values by owning pieces of land out there. So anyway, we'll talk more about these things in the classes that come up. Anybody have any questions? Anybody? Hello. Okay, well then that's all for today. So I'm kind of in a really massive construction area on a freeway, and they moved the exit. That's really neat when they actually move and exit. So the place that I was looking for to get off, to get back to my hotel, is no longer there. So anyway, I can talk as I drive. I just can't change the settings on Zoom and load the recording onto Canvas as I drive. So I'm going to have to get off the road sometime soon and hopefully find the surface streets that can get me back to my hotel. Anyway, thanks, and try to do the same thing again on Monday, and we'll continue and take a look at some of the material in chapter 4. Okay? Take care.